Welcome to Beyond Talking Points from Little Visionaries Bookstore. I'm Bridgitte Jackson-Buckley, and today I'm speaking with Akilah S. Richards. Akilah S. Richards is a Jamaican-born podcaster and writer who speaks about equity and cultural competence, leadership development, conscious parenting, and how people unschool. She started Raising Free People Network, a digital multimedia platform for education, deep listening, and emergent collaborations within the intersections of privilege, parenting, and power. Akilah joins us today to discuss her latest book, Raising Free People, book cover, Unschool as liberation and healing work. Welcome, Akilah.
Thank you so much, Bridgitte. Happy to be here.
Okay, so Raising Free People was published during the fall of 2020. And you write, when many families were dealing with the upheaval of children being home from school because of everything that happened with the pandemic, for you and Chris, it was Wednesday.
Yeah, and I think that actually is a quote from Bio, who did the foreword for me. I think that was Bio's quote in that foreword. Yep. And that was our reality too. Yeah.
Yeah, and there is a quote that I really like that Bio Akomolafe wrote in the foreword when it was such a strong foreword. And there was a statement that really stuck with me where he wrote, "I simply couldn't send her away to the quiet of captivity of a desk and predetermined answers." I love that so much because it spoke to the lack of creativity. But let's go back. So one does not simply just remove their children from the traditional educational system. It takes a tremendous amount of thought, consideration, and that is so evidently displayed in your book. I mean, you really thought about it. So what initially prompted you and Chris to make that transition and to consider a non-traditional learning environment for Sage and Marley?
Yeah. So we're going to work with this delay. I think there's a bit of a gap.
Oh, there's a delay. Okay.
Yeah, but so I write about it, in a bit of detail in that first. Marley, who's our oldest, she's about to be 18. She was so frustrated with not being able to, as she says, and I wrote in there, I don't have time to think my thoughts. That was her thing, like her little arms flailing and just frustration in her voice. And she just felt like school interruption of whatever she was doing. She was very much like my own little world type of person, also very social. So she liked that element of being around lots of people, but she felt really frustrated and stifled by stopping whatever she was doing to go there to do stuff. And then further in, when she got the gifted and talented label tacked onto her, and Chris and I felt so proud of that, it just deepened that descent out of herself, out of personhood and into studenthood, which collapses a lot of what she is, and was exploring. And then Sage, who's our youngest, she's about to be 16 this month. She used this term that they kept peopling on her, and I find it to be like a deeply useful word for me, peopling, where she needed to like posture and present, and that they had these expectations of her that had nothing to do with her. And my daughters look a lot alike, so even the way that she got collapsed into being Marley's sister as opposed to being Sage, and she just was really frustrated with this lack of capacity to just choose, because a lot of things were done. Consent is not a part of conventional education, which is not the same as traditional education, because traditional education is a lot more whole person centered. So what we're doing now is not traditional, it's conventional, and it's a particular design. So that it took about 2 years, a little over 2.5 years of the girls being frustrated with school. Marley in particular was shorter for Sage, that we were like, oh, Chris and I were like, So they're not letting up on this thing. And I'm involved, I'm on the PTA board, I'm doing all the things, and it's not changing this element because this element is inherent to schooling. So then eventually we just said, okay, we'll withdraw them. And then if it doesn't work out, we'll just put them back in, you know? So we started there, yeah.
Okay, okay. And so to do that requires a drastic change to your lifestyle. And you write about the hectic urban life, and that to do that, you decided to not only just take them out, but you were going to go to a different environment. So you left the mortgage, the car payment, the YMC memberships, the urban lifestyle, which is pretty much centered around doing and consumption. And you had, it seems to be an overall shift in your values.
I would
So
say,
what differences did you notice? I'm just curious, like, what difference did you notice? Like, how did it affect their learning, their ability to learn when you were out of a hectic urban environment, which was, of course, affecting you and Chris as well, and moving to
yeah.
the rural setting of Jamaica?
So a few things. So one, setting, we were in another city. You know, the first few years we were in Kingston, which is very
Okay,
similar to Atlanta in a lot of ways.
okay,
And what it did was, I'll start with for Chris and me, it didn't actually shift our values. We were just out of alignment with values, right? So then being in that position allowed us to recognize those things and to see ourselves not as being at the top of this hill of the, you know, as Jamaicans who migrated here and all the expectations were placed. We were actually in the rubble. We're in the rubble of it, not at the top of, gotten a house and the car and, you know, all of the things that you say you want, but they were not in alignment with what we were and what we actually wanted. So when we spent that first, I think the first stint was like 3 months that we went to Jamaica. One of the big things was just cost of living. So we were spending so much money, and I talk a lot about that in the book, working just to cover the bills, to cover the expenses. And then it was like a third of what we spent each month we were able to spend in Jamaica and have such a rich lifestyle. So the girls, their capacity to learn was never, it was just compromised, because humans learn, like we do that quite naturally. We learn in different ways, but you can't not learn. It just looks like different things. You cannot understand what learning looks like because you learn differently, but you can't not learn. We moved, what it did was allow Chris and me and Marley and Sage to become better observers of how learning actually happens and how not to get in the way of it. So it wasn't about what to do differently. It was, a lot of it was shedding, deschooling. Yeah.
very, very well said, Akilah. I totally understand that, just being out of alignment. And here you recognized it and you did something about it. Because a lot of times people will feel something's off, something's not right, but for whatever reasons, you know, they just choose to keep going. You know, people have their reasons for doing things. So
Yep.
I like that you clarified it wasn't a shift in values, but that you were out of alignment, and it was a matter of moving back into alignment by releasing what wasn't working.
Yes, a lot of getting rid of, a lot of slowing down. That's why in my work, I talk a lot about pausing. I'm writing another book, and it is really centered around, because that, when we move from conventional education to something else for whatever reason, not necessarily unschooling, but a lot of children suffer in schools. We know this. You know, a lot of teachers suffer in schools. We know this, right? Teachers want to be able to understand how a child learns and facilitate that, but they are at, you know, kind of under a different version of the wings of a system that says this is what you need to do and this is how long they need to be there so that the adults can work. You know, it used to be about factory work. How schooling got started, the conventional education system, was because the parents needed the children to be somewhere while they did their work. So it just was like so much of the shift was like, oh, it's not about what to do and what we know and what you provide and what classes they take. So much of it was just to pause, so that all of the other types of intelligence that are not about information could work us.
Could come
And
through,
that's
you
what a
could
lot of
hear
it
it.
was. And feel it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, so you took them out of school and then they did a little virtual and then you moved. Okay, so at that point, and even when you moved to Jamaica, I love that you said you were trying to force Marley to take her textbooks with her to the beach. As I relate to that, where you're like, come on,
Yeah.
just do it there, it'll be fine. And she was not having it. So
Mm-mm.
this really seemed to me like it was the beginning of you not only learning the importance of deep listening, but also, is this where the deschooling and unschooling came? And if you could take this moment to define the difference, what is
Yeah.
deschooling, and talk about deep listening, the importance of it?
Yeah. So I'm gonna just pull up the definitions that I've settled into, and I'm also not committed to, because I believe that we can and should perhaps define and redefine things as we continue to be in relationship with them and have different understandings of them. So
Sure.
right now, I'll start with those definitions and then answer more of your questions. So I call unschooling a child trusting, anti oppression, liberatory, love centered approach to parenting and caregiving. Unschooling is also about creating and expanding communities of confident, capable people who understand how they learn best and how to work collaboratively to learn and to solve things. Deschooling is essentially shedding the programming and habits that resulted from other people's agency over your time, your body, your thoughts, or your actions, and then designing and practicing beliefs that align with your desire to thrive, to be happy, and to succeed. Those are the ways that I understand unschooling and deschooling. A lot of the information out there around deschooling, in my perspective, treats it like a thing that you do and then it ends. It has a start and an end. There's even language out there that says for every this amount of time that your kid was in school, they need this amount of time to deschool. I think that's foolishness. I think that we have been deschooling since 2012, and we will forever be deschooling, because it's shedding the programming and habits that happened when there was no consent, when somebody told you when to pee, who to talk to, when to be quiet, what to learn, whether you were valid or not, how not to help the person next to you if they need help, because then that takes away from your shine. Like it's recognizing and beginning to reclaim that sort of thing. That's what it is. And so unschooling is just a way of living that doesn't center school. It doesn't mean you're anti-school. The girls have been in school in and out, especially as we expanded to other countries, and they might like a place and they register. And it's just about not centering school, not seeing school as the church of learning, but seeing yourself as the church of learning, and having multiple pathways, including school when you choose it. Because unschooling is about consent. It believes that you can't actually learn something and have it be of value if you don't consent to it. And it doesn't mean somebody else might not introduce it to you. It doesn't mean that you don't have teachers, like in the conventional sense. None of that, because learning is inclusive of all of that. But it means that in the case of like a child, because anyone can unschool at any age, but for the case of the child, essentially, if a child can choose to do something and then stop doing it because they're not interested anymore without a consequence, that's a form of unschooling. That's all it means. It just means that their consent is a part of the journey, because you see their learning journey as theirs, and you see yourself as the adult as a partner. It's partnership-centered parenting. So that is what we began to do. And when we moved to Jamaica the first time, just for 3 months, that's when they started virtual school. We just did the Georgia Virtual Academy and had my mom ship the books and the whole thing. And then even after they stopped doing the books, we were basically homeschooling, which is just school at home. You know, it's K through 12 model. You do it at home, maybe you do it a little nicer. Maybe they get to pick if they're into dinosaurs, you use dinosaurs. But it's absolutely under the premise that this is what you need to learn by this age, and this is how you learn it. Whereas unschooling is, who are you? What are you interested in? What am I noticing about you? What do you need me to know about you? Here are some things that I think are important that I want to offer to you. How are you feeling about them? What's important to you? Do you feel safe and comfortable to offer it to me? How do you feel about that? And beyond that, Bridgitte, it goes beyond learning in the sense that you and I probably understand it, and goes into relationship. Unschooling is about being a trustful and trustworthy person to the person over whom you have power, because it's practice for power dynamics in all relationships. Yeah.
There was a lot you said in there. There's so much, just so much power in what you said. I mean, I heard so many things because where you're taking, I'm just, when you were talking, I was thinking sovereignty, a love of learning, trusting yourself to go where you're drawn, like not suppressing the creative spark within you. Like if you want to draw something a certain way, if you want to get up and just go run on the playground, you can do it. So I'm thinking that really was a clear explanation to me between the difference of studenthood and personhood. And also, the self-inquiry as parents, and then this really, not an inquisition, but this profound wanting to know, who are you to child? What are you interested in? Who is it that you want to be? And and the way you're talking about this expansive environment of learning is truly that. It's expansive because it's so open. And it sounds like you're saying that learning can come from anywhere and everywhere and anyone. And the child is often open to that. And sometimes when they're simply sitting and being told, look here, answer this way, color in the bubble, that is stifled.
Absolutely. And it doesn't go away. So I call that schoolishness, because it travels with us. It's not like when you leave a classroom environment, you dust yourself off and you're like, all right, I got all that information. That was great. I love these 3 teachers. I got this information. I made 7 best friends and I'm out. Nah. What happens in that time, in that space, in those super formative years, we're always forming, but in those particularly formative years, it travels with us. So if you, for example, I think I even talked about this in the book, but I give the example all the time of adults that I know who are nervous to read out loud, or who say that they're not readers necessarily. That's because it isn't because they're not, but it's because of the framework, how they were validated or invalidated from that comparison model that most of us are used to in school. So if you don't learn like this, then here are the labels that are attached to you. And because everybody around is trusting that church of school, you believe that about yourself. And you believe that that's what's necessary for other people too. So we are very comparison based and really judgmental of ourselves. And how you do anything is how you do everything. So even when you feel, most of us will say, well, I'm really hard on myself and I don't give the same, type of thing to myself that I give to other people. You giving other people that same thing too in a different way, because it's a part of what you're carrying. So much of the work is to just recognize that schoolishness or school wounds. A lot of people talk about the wounds that happened specifically through schooling. You get to, as an unschooler, you get to notice that. So just noticing can be so powerful. You don't always solve it, but just to notice it and to have that level of compassion for yourself to say, oh my gosh, no wonder I'm like this. And oh my gosh, so I'm passing this on to my kid in this way. I wonder if I can have a different experience, and what might that look like? It's just that sort of, as you said, that self-inquiry of the parent, because most of the deschooling that's happening is to the parent, also to the child, but also to the parent, to start to recognize, like, who would I be if those tools of oppression, that colonization minded idea of how learning happens, and the separation of intergenerational elements. You don't even know your grandmother because she's gone to wherever, work maybe, and you're at school, and then in the evenings you're tired. And all of these things are connected to our capacity to relate, particularly intergenerationally. And as an unschooler, you just get to notice that, and you get to choose when and where schooling is useful for you. And you get to listen to a child to see when and how schooling is useful for them. Because as you said, the learning is everywhere. There's a quote by, I think his name is Ken Danford. He says, learning is natural and schooling is optional, or something like that, right? And I 100% see that, because we spend so many of the most creative years of our lives being told what to do. And as an entrepreneur, I feel like I'm still recovering from that. My discovery of my capacity to learn WordPress just to make a website, or to connect with a person because I'm really excited about what they do. And like, these things that I'm learning through my life are the things that I'm also witnessing in my daughters. I'm like, oh, you don't have to wait till you've grown to be free, to be free. Yeah.
Right, right. You don't. And a lot of, yeah, I mean, it's just, gosh, it's just, I really like what you're saying, because, we come in free and then there's conditioning.
Yep.
So it all ties together with the shedding, the releasing, of what is no longer necessary. It all ties in together. And so that leads us to, you write, you grew up with this belief that school was the vehicle for liberation. So did I, and when education is forced and standardized, it stifles natural learning and the things to which learning inevitably lead, kills creativity, and chokes out confident autonomy. So everything that you just explained was talking about confident autonomy, because
Yes.
I can elaborate on it a little more, because if you are a confident child, you will be a confident adult. If you are simply following the rules, that's what you're taught for your whole life as a child, you will grow up as an adult who always follows the rules and may not question some things. So confident autonomy, to me, it sounds like it's not just something that would benefit the children, but the entire family, the entire community.
Yeah. Yes, because we're just looking at young versions of ourselves. I think it was the Victorian era is when the term childhood became popularized. Childhood is a construct of sorts, this idea that, because when indigenous cultures, the idea of what a child is not a separate thing out there. Children are learning and living in environments with adults and elders as well. They are figuring things out. They are not being treated like blank slates to be molded as needed, right? That concept, we need to know that it wasn't always that way. That is not germane to who we are as humans. There's a time when the concept of childhood was constructed and lived into, time when school was constructed and lived into. And as a Black woman, I also recognize why so many of us as Black people prioritize education, because it was the thing, as we brilliantly do. We take whatever is happening around us and we make it, we alchemize that and figure out what to do. Time, school was that, the educational system we needed to push so that we can get in that way. My belief, and a lot of us, is that now we need to pay attention to the next things. Don't stay in that one. The time that is spent to try to make the school system, which is a part of an entire other system that's connected to capitalism, to make that different. It's important that we also have people who are spending the time looking at what's so much older than school, and also what young people are actually saying about how school is not useful for them, and imagining and living beyond that. Because so many young people are very clear about things that we as adults are like, we're trying to do something different with it. And they're telling us.
They are. They are. And the fact that they're telling us so much, it pushes you to look at how do you view children? Are you viewing children as beings to sit down and be quiet? Or are you viewing this as a mutual learning exchange? Because I can definitely see that I learn as much from my kids as they learn from me. And I'm willing, sometimes they will say something, oh, I didn't even think of that. Oh, wow, he really showed me or told me, I want to see, I want to know, and I'm willing to, do that little dance of, you write in the book about, I can't remember if it was Marley or Sage, but the whole idea around respect, because when they have autonomy and they feel comfortable to say things, sometimes they may say things in an old school environment might be considered disrespectful.
Yep.
They might be saying something that's true, so you have to really pay attention to what ears are you listening with. Are you listening with judgmental ears or ears that you really want to know and learn something and have a equitable, respectful relationship with your child? Because it's all about growing and learning.
Yes, exactly. And it's old school environments, it's right now environments. Like, I still have those moments when one of my daughters says something, I'm like, yo, who you talk to? Like I'm in that space. But I also, because I am constantly on my deschooling journey, I also recognize, again, I get to observe and notice in that moment, oh, I'm responding from a wound. I'm not actually responding to what's happening here. What happens is I'm responding. And it doesn't mean that I don't have the space as an unschooler to hold my boundaries and to say what is not okay for me, because we're in relationship. So I'm like, yo, when you talk like that, I can't even listen. So we can have a conversation about what that means, because that's where the liberation piece comes in. My friend, this brilliant therapist, Shauna Murray Brown, has this quote where she says, freedom is individual, liberation is collective.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
I like that.
Yes, Shauna Murray
Shauna
Brown.
Murray Brown.
Murray, Murray. She's brilliant. She's also been on my podcast. I have an unschooling podcast called Fear of the Free Child. That's how we actually met. And it's true, because the thing is, when we talk about raising free people, in the unschooling world, there's this idea, unschooling had been very whitewashed. It was a lot of conventional European colonial mindset. That's what I mean by whitewash, where a free child was just free to do whatever. So it's like, oh, Jimmy just hit, yeah, but he's free. He doesn't. We do not understand freedom like that. Okay, because on the other side of freedom is responsibility. So if your freedom impedes other people's capacity to feel safe and free, it's a problem. So the whole point of raising a free person is so that they understand what liberation means, which is a collective freedom, which means that I can be myself, which means I get to hold my boundaries, which means we get to figure each other out along the way. We're not determining, this is what a mother is like, this is what a daughter is like. So therefore, if you step outside this boundary, boom. It's not like that. We are actually growing together. We are learning each other. As I say to my girls all the time, we known each other the same time. Me being your mom does not necessarily mean, I'm hip to more game on certain things, because we've known each other the same amount of time. Yes. So that's what a lot of this is about, really being able to peel away at the things that, for me, I understand to be connected to colonization, that we now get to move outside of, so that we are in a space of collective liberation, where people understand freedom to also have the other side of that coin be responsibility. So if I'm free to be myself, that self is also checking in with how that affects the people around me, and whether and how I'm shifting to be part of a community of liberated people, and not just me being free and y'all just gonna get this freedom. Like, no.
Love it. Okay, so talk to us about the Agile Learning Center for families, that for families practicing self-directed education, because I did not know about that. And I just love how that came about, where the girls got together and said, we think we want to try school here. And you were like, what? Like, yeah. Wait a minute. I mean, that brought up all kinds of, but is this not working? But I thought this was cool, and all of that. So just talk to us about that experience. That was totally new to me. I didn't know anything about that.
Yeah, the Agile Learning Centers. So I'd known about them for some time. They're all over the world. Quite a few in the US, some in Mexico. Where else? There, I know the US, and they're in a lot of places. And you can just look them up, Agile Learning Network, amazing group. And it really is like an unschooling school. And when the girls spoke to us about wanting to go to school, my frustration was not so much about school, because as I said, we dip in and out of it. We're not anti-school. We were in Costa Rica and we were about to go to Guatemala. You know, we had a very specific plan, and it was like a $56 ticket to Guatemala, and it was like amazing. Found a great
Wow.
place to stay. So that was my thing. It was like, can we just, continue to do our thing and da. But again, the girls have been life guides for a very long time for me, and been also my medicine for a lot of wounds that I didn't even know I was just toting around in this big bag. And so as we listened, it's like, okay, all right, let's do it. And the Agile Learning Centers are just spaces where these premises about sovereign people and how learning happens are put into practice. So some of the tools, one of my favorite tools from Agile Learning is called Change Up, where when you make an agreement to do a thing and it's not working out, there's this process that allows you to pay attention to what is happening, to apply what's called a sociocratic model, if people are aware of sociocracy, where it's about something being good enough for now, safe enough to try. It isn't about a consensus, because a consensus leaves other people out. So it's not about just doing the thing that the most charismatic or most outspoken people want to do. It's about finding ways for us to be in right relationship, which means we're not throwing anyone away. No one is left out. So what are we going to do now that everyone is consenting to, that is good enough for now, safe enough to try? And then if it doesn't work, then we change it up. We meet, we talk about it, because it's the term that they use that I love is intentional culture co-creation. You don't come
Wow.
into the culture of
Intentional
the
culture
school.
co-creation. That's very
Yes.
powerful.
Whereas what we're used to is that, you send your child to that school so they could be a part of that culture, and then they're going to wear the shirt, and then they're going to get all the benefits because they went to that school. ALCs say, no, we're going to co-create a culture together. And it's not going to be the school's culture. It's going to be the culture of that group. So when new students come in, then culture is shifting, and when people shift, culture shifts, because it's fluid and dynamic like nature, and we are nature. We're nature. So that's essentially what ALCs are, Agile Learning Centers, and they are just like any other space where people gather. It's not a utopia, it's not nirvana. There are issues in there, because wherever people are togethering and willing to figure things out, right? So those things are there, but the tools, the practices, the toys are really about confident autonomy in a collective sense. Yeah.
A new earth.
That, Bridgitte. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so what has been the most surprising or unexpected part of your unschooling journey, or this whole journey?
How much it feels like a coming back to myself, like how familiar, even in the myriad of ways that it is like unnerving and unraveling and uncomfortable. There's also a sense of it feels like the people before me, like even the ones that not even my great grandmother, because I knew my great grandmother, one of them, thankfully, but even before that, it feels like they are like, whew, thank God. Like that's what they wanted for us. And that's, I didn't think of any of that stuff. I was like, oh great, the girls get to be more themselves. And so that's the big surprise for me, how much of it feels like deep spiritual ancestral type of work that started with just listening to our daughters about what school was not for them. That continues to surprise and humble and excite and motivate me. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I feel just a tremendous sense of love in everything that you're saying. Like that really is at the core.
Yes, it's love-centered. It is.
Yeah.
Whereas the other things, yes, of course, we put our children in schools most of us, because we love them and we want the best for them and we understand that to be the best for them, and logistically, because we gotta, whether we work at home or out of the home, it isn't practical. So a lot of people who hear these things and learn about it, we get it, but logistically we can't figure that out. But that system, it's because that system was never centered in love. It was centered in production and segmenting and making a particular thing for a particular thing. Whereas love is not about what can you be for what I need. Love is listening and connecting and consent and unraveling, and it's messy at times. That's one of the beautiful surprises of it too, where I'm like, oh my God, I thought I was so free-spirited, but really, there's so many things that I'm like, I need this like this, you know? So it's like so many surprises about just unraveling, the power of having the space to unravel so that you can get familiar with what we are, you know, beyond the things that have been piled upon us.
Yes, I like that, the space to unravel. Beautifully said. Wow. We hope you enjoyed listening to this conversation with Akilah S. Richards. Little Visionaries is an independent bookstore that, beyond selling books, hosts community-focused interviews and author events. Remember, the best way to support your local independent bookstore and the community we serve is as simple as buying a book. Akilah S. Richards' celebrated Unschooling podcast, Fair of the Free Child, and the numerous workshops and gatherings she has been a part of have garnered the attention of Forbes Magazine, the New York Times, Good Morning America, and most importantly, BIPOC families interested in living healthier, consent-based, intergenerational relationships. Akilah is the founding board member of the Alliance for Self-Directed Education, and her latest book, Raising Free People, Unschooling as Liberation and Healing Work, has been heralded as the blueprint for the type of self-inquiry and collective liberation that will help us free our children and ourselves. You can learn more at raisingfreepeople.com. Thank you, Akilah.
Thank you so much, Bridgitte. This was fun.